Chapter 9. I should have slept like the dead, but I lay awake, my mind rattling inside my brain. The movie had only temporarily erased the garden. I saw peppers, beans, and cucumbers behind eyelids that wouldn't stay closed. In a week, all those vegetables would be ready to sell. Tomatoes, on the other hand, would be a long time coming. Their tiny beginnings still lazed in the drying petals, and each day brought a new sprinkling of yellow blossoms. The same in Dad's garden. What about the secret weapon? Did I have to keep that a secret now that I had my own? Well, Mr. Burt's tomatoes? I'd sleep on it, as Mother would say. By morning, something might come to me. In fact, it didn't take that long. I turned to the open window, curled up, and let the breeze touch my face. Outside, a sliver of moon chalked a perfect C on a blackboard sky. A street light etched a pale rim around the Burtses' garden. But St. Francis stood in the dark. In the dark! Holding my eyes open, I lay still and listened. When I could hear nothing but the crickets, I got up, groped for my overalls, and pulled them on. I held my shoes in one hand and opened the door just far enough to squeeze through, then shut it behind me. I tiptoed past my parents' closed door and down the stairs, skipping the steps I usually landed on hard just to hear them creak. With the flashlight I grabbed from the workroom, I made my way safely out the back door. I dropped my shoes onto the soft grass, worked my bare feet into them, and drew in a breath of night air. This was the right thing to do. I had promised not to tell the secret. I hadn't promised not to use it. I picked my way across the street to a row of the Burt's tomatoes. Then I turned on the flashlight and held it close to the plants, keeping the circle of light as small as possible. I worked quickly as sleepiness took hold. In the morning, I scarcely remembered getting back across the street and upstairs to bed. On Sundays, we slept late, ate a long, slow breakfast, and still had time to dress for church. I loved Sundays, except for the one when Tom Burt had gotten hurt, of course. I shuddered, recalling Mrs. Burt's frantic call. This time it was a knock on the door, just as I bit into one of my strip of Sunday only bacon. I'll get it, Dad said. I followed him into the living room. Morning, Ellen, I heard someone say. Why, Hank, what brings you out so early on a Sunday morning? Come in, come in. I grasped the back of the rocking chair. A shiny badge on his pocket was all that identified Hank Bonner as an officer of the law. But everybody knew he was the county sheriff. Sheriff Hank wore his official uniform at public affairs. But most days his uniform was the plaid shirt he wore that morning. Howdy, Teresa, said the sheriff. Have you found old Wolf? I asked, desperately hoping that was it. No, I'm sorry, little lady. No sign of the dog. Can we help you, Sheriff? Said Dad. Wondered if you saw anything unusual going over at the Burtses last night. I looked away. I don't think so, said Dad. Why? We had a complaint. Lady thought she saw a light moving around over there in the night. I leaned over the chair and fluffed a ruffled pillow, hoping the beating in my chest was not as loud to their ears as to mine. Mrs. Greer, no doubt. The poor woman complains of insomnia. Can't say who. Rules, you know. Sure, you didn't see anything? I'm sure. Teresa? I jumped at my name. You were closer. Did you see anything unusual from your window? No, that was true, not from my window. What's happened, Sheriff? Asked Dad. Well, come have a look. I trailed them across the street, torn between the need to know and the dread of finding out. What I saw made me gasp. A ragged path of trampled plants led from one corner of the garden to the sandstone slab. Mrs. Burt's statue lay broken into chunks, one at the base of the pedestal, one upside down in the plants. The hand of St. Francis, still holding the bird, lay almost hidden beneath the trampled vine. Tears stung my eyes. Dad's arm folded around my shoulder. The kids worked here yesterday, but they aren't the culprits. I came by after work and everything was fine then. Poor Tom. I noticed that he used only Bert's first name. Poor Tom's wife, I thought. Tiny Mrs. Burt, holding her husband's hand in the ambulance. Mischievous Mrs. Burt, slipping warm cookies to me before dinner time. Kind Mrs. Burt, sowing love everywhere, like St. Francis. It was her statue, after all. But Dad had his own thoughts. As if the tractor accident wasn't enough, he said. Then old Wolf disappears, and now this? The sheriff nodded. Well, Tom's a tough old bird. He'll survive his injuries better than losing his dog. He picked up the statue's hand. This won't make him any happier. Surely we'll find the dog, Sheriff. No one has had the heart to tell the Burts yet. Yeah, I should think. Dogs wander off and eventually come home. I hope it was so. But old Wolf had not wandered off from his home. He had run away from a place that was strange to him, miles and miles from here. No need to worry the Burts about the dog, then, or about this either. Dad knelt beside the toppled statue. We can fix it. The brakes are clean. Strong glue and careful matching should do it. The men stood up and looked around at the plants. They're not so bad either, the sheriff said. Leaves knocked off, but no damage to the roots. Who would do this? Dad wondered aloud. The sheriff shook his head. Hard to tell, and it sprinkled just enough in the night to wash away telltale footprints. Teresa, Dad said, his voice jolting me, did you see anything in the garden last night? Anything at all? Think hard. While I hesitated, the sheriff bent over one of the crumpled tomato plants. Uh-oh, he said, pulling something from among the leaves. We may have a clue here. Eagerly, I looked to see what he had. My eyes widened. Dad coughed. The sheriff held a blue striped baseball cap. I looked from the sheriff to Dad and back. The sheriff held the cap out for Dad to see, eyeing him curiously. For what seemed like a very long while, no one said a word. Finally, Dad spoke. This could have been dropped at any time. The sheriff stood with feet spread apart, arms folded over his chest. Without taking his eyes off Dad, he said, Yes, I suppose you could have missed it when you had your look around. My throat felt raw and my eyes stung, but I held out my hand for the cap. I ran my finger over the crooked red T I had so proudly embroidered over the bill. This is mine, Sheriff Hank, I said. I looked around at the broken statue and torn plants and whispered, But I didn't do this. Dad's hand was firm on my back, his fingers pressing hard between my shoulder blades. We'll keep an eye out tonight, Sheriff, and let you know if we see anything, he said. Fine. The sheriff gave St. Francis's hand with the bird to me, then lifted one chunk of the statue for Dad to carry and reached for the other piece. Oh, he said again as he turned it over. He touched a finger to the jagged edge. This looks like blood. I closed my eyes and held the statue's hand close to my chest. Tears pushed out from under my lids. I'd best keep the statue in custody for a few days, the sheriff said. It's evidence. He held out his hand. Afraid I'll have to keep the cap too. Sorry. The walk back across the street was a long journey. Dad was silent until we were seated on the front steps. There must be some explanation, Teresa. Your cap was on the kitchen counter when I went in for supper last night, and I think Mother reminded you to put it away. She did. I had rolled it up and stuck it in my back overall pocket, which was where I kept it. It must have fallen out as I worked in the darkened garden. What's going on, Teresa? Dad, I didn't do anything to Mr. Burt's statue or tramp on his plants. But you know who did? Billy Riggs, that's who, I said. I'll just bet. He glanced at my bare head. Be careful about accusing people, Teresa, even when you think you have evidence. Were you there? Not when the statue got broken. But sometime? Afraid so. When? I'm not sure exactly. It was after everybody was in bed. Teresa! He stood up, folded his arms, and eyed me like the sheriff had eyed him. Haven't we ever told you that you can't go out in the middle of the night by yourself? I don't think so. But a smart girl like you would know that, wouldn't she? I wasn't afraid, I said. I went to use a secret weapon. You what? I didn't tell anyone the secret, Dad. I just used it. Mr. Burt won't know, even if we win. I didn't think you'd be mad. He nearly exploded. Young lady, you are missing the point. You went out in the night without permission. If someone else was prowling in the garden, you put yourself in danger. That's not fair to your mother and me, especially when Jeff is in danger already. He might as well have it. I barely managed. I'm sorry. All right. He sat down again, tugging his trouser legs up as he did. I'm going to let it pass, this time. We'd better get dressed for church. As we stood to go in, he reached for my hand. About the tomatoes, he said. It's just a contest. It's just for fun. I know, I said, but we both knew it was more than that.